Hey everyone, tonight we re-embarking on a journey that will completely flip upside down everything you thought you knew about beauty in the Middle Ages. Imagine a world where rotting, crooked teeth weren't a shameful flaw but a sign you were worthy of marrying into nobility, where women willingly poisoned their own bodies each day, chasing the ideal of ghostly pale skin, where pulling out half your own hairline was celebrated as the peak of elegance and intellect, the fantasy of medieval beauty you've absorbed from Hollywood. It's all a myth, and this evening, you'll uncover ideals so bizarre and extreme. They make today's social media beauty filters look harmless in comparison. Before we plunge into these astonishing truths, take a second to subscribe and tap the like button if you're genuinely curious about the secrets we're about to reveal together. And while you're at it, tell me, where are you watching from? Curled up in bed, multitasking at work, or just scrolling casually? Drop it in the comments. I love connecting with you. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let us step into a past where beauty wasn't just dangerous sight could literally kill you. Picture this scene. The year is 1347. Lady Margaret de Clare stands before her polished bronze mirror. She isn't admiring a fresh layer of powder or rouge. Instead, she's carefully inspecting the gaps between her decaying teeth, making sure each space is perfectly visible. Why? Why? Because, as medieval cosmetic scholar Dr. Monica Green uncovered in her groundbreaking studies, those gaps weren't imperfections. They were treasured markers of high status. Here's the unbelievable truth. Sugar in medieval Europe was so outrageously costly, only the wealthiest elites could afford it. We're talking about a substance more expensive per pound than what ordinary people earned in several months. So, when teeth began to rot from constant sugar consumption, it didn't signal neglect, it signaled privilege. A mouthful of pristine, white, untouched teeth marked you as poor, someone too lowly to buy the luxury that destroyed smiles. Chroniclers like John of Salisbury even wrote about noble families celebrating their children's first sugar-rated tooth, the same way parents today cheer for a baby's first steps. Imagine a social media post, little Edward's first cavity so proud, but dental decay was only one piece of the puzzle. Now let's turn to another strange obsession that will blow your mind. Enormous foreheads. In 1389, historian Susan Mosher Stewart uncovered household records belonging to Alice Deans. The entries revealed she spent the modern equivalent of nearly $3,000 on custom silver tweezers and precision mirrors. Why? To meticulously pluck her hairline back, strand by strand, pushing it farther and farther until her forehead seemed to begin halfway up her skull. This wasn't about vanity alone. It was deliberate. The belief at the time was that intelligence was tied to the size of the brain, and by extension, the size of the forehead. The larger your forehead, the smarter and more refined you appeared. So women invested hours weekly, reshaping their natural hairlines, even enduring scarring from rather than shame. Those scars were badges of dedication to intellectual beauty. The famous medical text Trotula, written by medieval physicians, even offered detailed instructions for this forehead enhancement, treating it as seriously as we treat skincare routines today. And then we reach the deadliest trend of them all. The obsession with unnaturally white, translucent skin. Not just pale but skin so ghostly it looked nearly bluish, as though it had never seen daylight. Cambridge historian Dr. Sarah Rhys-Jones documented how women would smear their faces with cosmetics made from white lead mixed with vinegar to achieve this ethereal look. And yes, they knew it was poisonous. Medieval medical treatises warned clearly of lead's toxic effects, yet women still chose to risk their health, even their lives, for that social signal. Why would they take such chances? Because bronzed or tanned skin was associated with outdoor labor and poverty. Choke white skin, on the other hand, bro Cassid. I am wealthy enough to never work under the sun. Some women even went further, practicing deliberate bloodletting not to cure ailments, but to appear faint, fragile, almost spectral. By draining themselves into anemia, they embodied the dying swan aesthetic that noblemen adored. The Venetian cosmetic trade flourished on this lethal demand, producing and exporting lead-based powders across Europe. even when noble women like Bianca Maria Visconti of Italy tragically died from lead poisoning. At just 23 and 3092, the popularity of Venetian face paint only skyrocketed. But here's the remarkable part. These people weren't ignorant. They had doctors. They understood the dangers. They simply made the conscious decision to prioritize social prestige over physical safety. Just as today some risk plastic surgery, extreme dieting, or untested beauty fads, medieval elites risked everything for status. The stark difference: their ideals were the mirror opposite of ours. Where we admire flawless, white smiles, they flaunted decay as proof of wealth. Where we long for a sun-kissed glow, they prized ghostly pallor. Where we appreciate natural hairlines, they painstakingly manufactured vast foreheads. What this reveals is something profound and timeless about human nature. The lengths we go sacrificing comfort, health, even our lives to be accepted, admired, and recognized by society. As historian Dr. Carolyn Walker Bingham explained, these practices weren't just shallow vanity. They were survival strategies. Beauty could dictate your prospects in marriage, your family's social mobility, even your economic security. In short, beauty was a kind of currency. Just as we invest in education or careers today, medieval men and women invested in their appearances. So what lesson lingers when we imagine Lady Margaret in that bronze mirror, counting the gaps in her ruined teeth? It's this: the hunger to be seen as beautiful, to reshape ourselves for love, power, or acceptance, is eternal. The techniques change, the standards flip upside down, but the core desire remains constant. And as we continue on this journey, you'll meet figures who gambled everything for beauty stories so startling they may challenge you to reflect on your own sacrifices for appearance. Because in their extremes, they expose truths about power, desire, and the human condition that still shape us today. Next, we'll turn to a new force that redefined beauty entirely: the medieval church. This wasn't just about saving souls that dictated what entire civilizations viewed as beautiful or sinful. You'll see why some of the most devout women of history believed their beauty could condemn them to hell, and how religious teachings shaped ideals that now seem almost alien. So imagine this. The year is 1203. You're a young woman standing at a crossroads. On one side, beauty could secure you wealth and social status. On the other, the church warns that vanity is a mortal sin that could damn you forever. That impossible tension, the tug-of-war between survival and salvation, would shape the concept of beauty for 1,000 years. Enter Christina of Marcia, a real 12th century woman whose life story will leave you stunned. Chronicled carefully by monks of St. Albans Abbey, Christina was so strikingly beautiful that men literally halted in the streets to gawk at her. But here's the twist. She believed her beauty was not a blessing, but a curse, a trap set by the devil to pull her away from God. When her parents arranged her marriage to a wealthy nobleman who coveted her looks, Christina took an action almost unimaginable to us today. She disfigured herself. She pressed a heated iron to her face, sheared off her hair, and rubbed ashes into her skin to appear as unattractive as possible. Why? Because Christian doctrine of the era often framed beauty as Satan's weapon, luring souls away from holiness. Imagine being so terrified of your own attractiveness that you destroy it deliberately. And she wasn't alone. As Dr. Bingham's research in Holy Feast and Holy Fast reveals, dozens of medieval women aspiring to sainthood intentionally marred themselves to avoid the sin of vanity. This created one of history's strangest contradictions. While nobles ruined their teeth and poisoned their skin to appear more attractive, devout Christians did the opposite, making themselves less appealing in order to grow closer to God. The church promoted a very specific model of sacred beauty, embodied in a single figure, the Virgin Mary. As medieval art historian Dr. Madeleine Cavinus explains, Mary became the gold standard, but this was not beauty in the secular sense. It was restrained, controlled. Mary was always shown as pale, but not ghostly. Her hair was veiled, her eyes lowered in modesty, her beauty unconscious, almost accidental. This was the so-called Mary paradox. Women were expected to reflect divine beauty, but only without pride or self-awareness. Too much beauty risked vanity. Too little risked neglect of God's creation. Walking this line was like balancing on a spiritual tightrope. Even beauty manuals of the times they existed had to tread carefully. The famous Trotula, compiled by physicians in 12th century Italy, began with disclaimers. These remedies, it insisted, were not for vanity, but to preserve the health of the body given by God. Rouge was framed as a way to reflect Christian vitality, not seduction. Shaping eyebrows was described as opening windows to the soul so one's devotion could shine through. Every step of grooming had to be justified as an act of worship. Yet for ordinary women, this balancing act was exhausting. Every day meant navigating contradictory pressures. Look appealing enough to secure a future, but not so appealing as to endanger your soul. Consider Marguerite Poré, a 13th century French mystic studied by historian Dr. Sarah Field. She wrote about her torment with what she called the mirror temptation. She would stare at her reflection for hours, not out of vanity, but confusion. Was her hair too radiant? Did her natural complexion seem too worldly? In her writings, she essentially describes what modern psychology might call body dysmorphia, born from the impossible religious standards surrounding appearance. The church reinforced this pressure through beauty sermons. Yes, entire homilies devoted to lecturing women on how to present themselves. Surviving collections from the Vatican reveal priests spelling out rules on everything from acceptable hair color to how much of the neckline could be revealed. To make matters more confusing, different religious orders held opposing rules. Benedictine nuns were forbidden from grooming enhancements at all, seeing them as prideful, but Cistercian nuns were required to maintain neat, polished appearances, believing neglect was equally sinful. A woman moving from one convent or town to another might be forced to overhaul her beauty routine entirely. And perhaps the most captivating piece of this medieval puzzle was the belief in inner beauty. Not metaphorical, but literal. A conviction that holiness itself could transform the body's appearance. Medieval society carried a conviction that moral purity could literally shape the human face, that good itself could make you more attractive, while sin could deform and darken your features. The great 13th century philosopher Thomas Aquinas wrote that virtue was not just symbolic light, but a visible radiance that could shine through the skin, giving holy people an otherworldly glow. Antis Wasenti considered poetic metaphor. Physicians of the period described it in clinical terms. Pious women, through devotion and prayer, were believed to gain clearer complexions, brighter eyes, and more balanced features. Holiness, they argued, manifested physically. This belief produced some of the strangest practices in medieval beauty culture. Women fasted for long stretches, convinced that spiritual cleansing would make their faces more radiant. Hours were spent on their knees, praying not only for salvation but for just the right level of attractiveness to be pleasing in God's eyes without straying into the deadly sin of pride. The chronicler Matthew Paris tells of noble women who swung back and forth between indulgence in elaborate beauty, rituals, and periods of self-punishment, hoping to strike the impossible equilibrium between honoring God's creation and resisting vanity. What's striking is how far this religious influence extended. It wasn't confined to individuals, it spilled into fashion, art, and even architecture. Gothic cathedrals, for instance, were built deliberately vast and overwhelming, designed to remind worshippers of their smallness, reinforcing the message that earthly beauty was temporary while divine beauty was eternal. Stained glass windows weren't just decoration. Their colors carried sacred symbolism. Blue evoked the Virgin Mary's purity, gold represented divine illumination, and deep crimson embodied Christ's sacrifice. Wealthy women even aligned their wardrobe choices with these colors when attending services, turning fashion into a declaration of virtue. The wrong shade could be read as a moral failing. This created a culture unlike any other in history, a beauty system where the highest aim wasn't to be attractive to fellow humans, but to show oneself worthy of God's approval, while never appearing to invest it in one's looks. It was a paradoxical puzzle with rules that shifted depending on who was judging you. Your peers, your priest, or God himself. And yet, what stands out most when we study this culture is the resilience and creativity of medieval women. Despite suffocating restrictions, they found ingenious ways to balance self-expression with spiritual expectations. They developed coded routines that looked like acts of worship, fasts, prayers, even the choice of fabric colors while doubling as beauty practices. They formed quiet networks of support, helping one another navigate impossible standards. In many ways, they faced pressures not so different from ours today. To be attractive enough to succeed socially, but not shallow enough to be condemned. Only for them the punishment for misstepping was an embarrassment or gossip, it was the fear of eternal damnation. And this is where the story takes a darker turn. Because once the church decreed that pale skin symbolized purity and divine favor, that ideal quickly fused with secular status. What had begun as spiritual anxiety transformed into one of the deadliest beauty trends in European history. The obsession with whiteness didn't just make women anxious, it killed them by the thousands. Enter Isabella Bavaria, crowned Queen of France in 1385. Her beauty routine was both elaborate and terrifying. Records preserved in the French National Archives detail her daily use of a concoction called Benetian Ceruse, a paste of white lead, vinegar, and egg whites applied across her face, neck, and hands. The result was a dazzlingly pale, porcelain appearance, but the cost was dire. Her personal physician, Master Jean Mayer, noted in his journals that the queen suffered persistent headaches, memory lapses, and tremors, all classic signs of lead poisoning. Yet she continued the practice for over 20 years, famously declaring in court documents, "A queen who is not pale is no queen at all." This was not an isolated case. Across aristocratic women knowingly poisoned themselves to embody an ideal. Historian Dr. Cara Rothcliffe, in her work on medieval medicine, shows that the demand for whitening cosmetics was so immense that entire mines in Spain and Italy were dedicated to producing lead for the beauty industry. By today's standards, this was an international business worth millions, a global supply chain built around selling poison disguised as elegance. Venice quickly rose as the epicenter of this trade. Venetian artisans perfected the formula, producing the smoothest, longest-lasting white paste by refining lead with special acids and aging it in sealed vessels for months. Their process was treated like a state secret. Cosmetic makers swore oaths of silence, and leaking formulas to foreigners could result in exile or execution. Women across Europe clamored for their products, convinced that only Venetian lead could create the flawless translucence that marked true nobility. The tragic irony. In striving for purity and spiritual perfection, women were ingesting one of the deadliest substances known to their own physicians. Medical texts of the time are littered with warnings about lead's destructive effects: neurological damage, organ failure, premature death. Still, the allure of pale skin was so overwhelming that knowledge was brushed aside. The consequences rippled beyond individuals. Chronicles from the Abbey of Fontevraud described noblewomen gathering in secret to exchange remedies for lead poisoning. Herbal infusions, poultices, and diets meant to ease headaches and nausea. They organized recovery days, abstaining from cosmetics just long enough to let symptoms ease, before diving back into the very routine that was killing them. Some, like Lady Eleanor de Clare, even hired personal physicians solely to monitor the damage from their lead use, essentially employing doctors to help them manage a slow-motion poisoning. But the lengths women went to extended far beyond powders. Manuals from the 14th century describe bloodletting performed purely for beauty. Each week, women would have blood drawn from their arms or temples to achieve the faint, fragile pallor that was considered irresistible. Others practiced moonbathing, staying awake under moonlight while avoiding the sun entirely, convinced that lunar rays would imbue their skin with luminous whiteness. Noble households reshaped their schedules into nocturnal lives, hosting candlelit banquets, conducting affairs under artificial light to maintain a ghost-like complexion. These women were called moon ladies, admired and feared for their uncanny, almost supernatural appearance. And here's the most astonishing part. Medieval science already understood the risks. Scholars like Avicenna and Albertus Magnus had written extensively about the dangers of lead, even linking it to neurological decline. Lawsuits cropped up. Tory courts from 1398 describe families of noble women in Paris attempting to sue Venetian merchants after their daughters died from cosmetic poisoning. But the courts dismissed the claims, ruling that the women had willingly used the products despite knowing the risks. It was labeled a kind of self-inflicted harm, voluntary death. The economic scale was staggering. By 1400, tax records showed that cosmetics had become Venice's third largest export. After silk and spices, the city built part of its fortune on selling a slow poison to women desperate to look noble. What this reveals most clearly is the crushing weight of social expectation. These women weren't ignorant. They calculated their choices, valuing social survival and family prestige over their health. In a world where your beauty determined your marriage prospects, your reputation, and your security, risking death for pale skin could seem like a rational decision. And when we look at modern beauty culture crash diets, unregulated fillers, dangerous procedures, parallels are unsettling. The technologies may have changed, but the logic is hauntingly familiar. The obsession with pala even spawned regional variations. Letters from 15th century England describe women mixing local herbs with lead to create signature shades of whiteness: English white, French white, Italian white. Spanish nobles, influenced by Moorish traditions, developed a style known as luna blanca, a powder made from lead blended with crushed pearls and silver dust, producing a shimmering bluish-white glow. The cost was astronomical. One application was more than half a year's wages for a laborer. But the darkest consequence wasn't just individual. Death's it was generational. Lead poisoning passed from mothers to children, leaving entire noble lineages scarred. Chronicles reveal repeated patterns of stillbirths, deformities, and mental decline in families like the Valois dynasty of France, almost certainly linked to centuries of cosmetic use. Imagine an entire royal bloodline slowly poisoning itself, generation after generation, all for the pursuit of an appearance that was literally fatal. As we push further into the strange and dangerous world of medieval beauty practices, prepare to encounter a trend that will completely change how you think about the relationship between intelligence and physical appearance. We re-stepping into the curious realm of forehead fashion, an era where women intentionally destroyed their natural hairlines in pursuit of towering foreheads that were thought to make them look wiser, more attractive, and more refined. The methods they used, the tools they crafted, and the sheer societal pressure that drove them to reshape their very faces reveal the extremes people will endure for beauty and status. Welcome to the age of the great minds of medieval Europe, women whose foreheads became their crowning jewels. While many were literally dying for pale skin, another obsession was unfolding across Europe, one that redefined how femininity, intelligence, and class were judged. Imagine a world where a naturally soft, low hairline wasn't considered lovely at all, but foolish. In fact, the larger your forehead, the more intelligent and desirable you seemed. That's where Agnes Sorel enters the story. The celebrated mistress of King Charles VII of France in the mid-1400s, Agnes was not just remembered for her royal affair, she became legendary for what chroniclers called the most magnificent forehead in Christendom. Her portraits and surviving descriptions in the Bibliothèque Nationale make it clear. She had pulled her hairline back so far that her forehead spanned nearly 4 inches above her brows. This was not an eccentric whim. It was the height of elegance. Agnes' famously vast forehead was so admired that noblewomen traveled incredible distances just to study it and imitate her style. Picture that pilgrimages made, not to holy relics, but to see a woman's forehead. Why? Because people sincerely believed that the more room one's skull offered for thought, the greater her rational capacity and her spiritual depth. This idea had roots in medieval philosophy. Thinkers like Albertus Magnus argued that different mental faculties were mapped onto specific parts of the skull, with the forehead representing reason and contemplation. A woman with a generous forehead was presumed wise, while one with a naturally low hairline was branded simple-minded and less suitable for marriage to an educated man. Out of this belief grew an entire beauty industry centered on forehead enhancement, complete with professionals, specialized tools, and elaborate procedures that rivaled anything you'd find in modern beauty clinics. Dr. Susan Mosher. Stewardess research into medieval fashion notes that professional frontists or forehead sculptors charged enormous fees to create the perfect highbrow. Their instruments were advanced for their time. Silver tweezers fitted with magnifying lenses, bronze rollers heated to dull pain, even primitive sunlight-focusing crystal devices that worked like early lasers. The Duchess of Burgundy's household records from 1467 detail commissions for custom forehead-shaping equipment, eerily echoing modern hair removal technologies. But achieving the ideal forehead was an Tier 1-day process. It demanded years of painstaking effort and near constant agony. Girls began in their early teens, plucking a few hairs at a time to slowly push their hairlines back. The Diary of Margarita Vangu, preserved in the British Library, describes how it took her 6 long years to achieve the look she wanted. She called it a torment I endured daily for the promise of wisdom's crown. Imagine that kind of commitment. 6 years of daily pain in exchange for social mobility. For these women, it wasn't mere vanity that could decide their futures. The stakes were astonishingly high. Court records tell us that wealthy families sometimes hired professional evaluators to judge a daughter's marital worth by the size of her forehead. In 1478, correspondence from Lorenzo de' Medici reveals he rejected a potential bride for his son because her forehead was judged too small for producing intellectual heirs. Across Europa, local trends added even more complexity. French women aimed for the Fran Majestica smooth, temple dome. Italian fashion favored angular, architectural brows, while English women admired the scholar's brow, which exposed the temples with a slightly receded crown. German nobles took it furthest, crafting foreheads so expansive they required special headgear to protect against the cold, effectively giving themselves artificial boldness in the name of beauty. The methods were diverse and often dangerous. Beyond endless plucking, women experimented with chemical depilation using quicklime or arsenic compounds that often scarred skin permanently. Others applied scalding oils mixed with poisonous herbs, trading burns for the illusion of intellect. Wealthier women pursued philosophical treatments, procedures performed by learned physicians who believed they could physically reshape skull bones. Antonio Benibieni, a Florentine doctor, documented surgical attempts to cut away sections of scalp and stretch skin backward, a process with terrifyingly high mortality rates. Still, demand never faltered. This fixation intertwined with larger debates about women's education. Universities were just beginning to cautiously admit women, and the question of female intelligence was fiercely argued. Enlarged foreheads became a visual argument, a physical way for women to assert intellectual equality. Christine de Pizan, one of the first professional female writers in Europe, even discussed forehead fashion in her book of The City of Ladies. She deliberately altered her own appearance, claiming she reshaped my skull to match my mind. In her eyes, the forehead wasn't just fashion, it was armor in the battle for recognition as a serious thinker. Yet this trend also exposed brutal social divides, because forehead modification took years and great expense. Only elite women could participate fully. Working women, unable to spare the time or money, kept a natural hairlines and were thus marked as less intelligent and lower class. Historians now call this the forehead gap, a literal facial marker of privilege. Surviving guild records even suggest that certain jobs, especially those requiring literacy or calculation, listed high forehead preferred in their hiring notes. The psychological toll was immense. Letters and diaries reveal deep insecurities among women who felt their natural brows doomed them to intellectual inferiority. Many internalized the belief that their very skulls betrayed them. Perhaps most tragically, mothers often began the plucking process on daughters as young as 10, convinced they were helping them secure better marriages and brighter futures. Imagine growing up with the message that your natural face wasn't smart enough. Economically, forehead fashion became big business. Toolmakers specializing in tweezers, measuring devices, and hair removal ointments thrived. Some of their inventions were so costly that they were handed down like family heirlooms. The sheer scale of this trade shows just how entrenched forehead culture had become. What's most striking, though, is not the absurdity of the practice, but the human reasoning behind it. These women weren't naive, they knew exactly what they were doing. They calculated that suffering through years of pain and disfigurement was a price worth paying to display intelligence and secure their futures. In many ways, this mirrors our modern world. Today, people spend fortunes on advanced degrees, high status, fashion, or intellectual signaling, all to prove their worth and intellect. The forms may have changed, but the drive is timeless. And as extreme as forehead fashion sounds, it was only the beginning. Because while women plucked and burned their way to larger foreheads, an even darker beauty industry was flourishing. This next chapter takes us into the perilous world of medieval cosmetics, a shadow trade, where powders and paints doubled as poisons, where makeup recipes read more like chemical weapons, manuals, and where glamour came at the cost of life itself. Prepare to meet the infamous Lucrezia Borgia, whose beauty routine was not only lethal to herself, but sparked an underground cosmetic arms race across Renaissance Europe. As shocking as it sounds, the substances that filled medieval makeup kits were no mere inconveniences, they were deadly poisons. Yet Lucrezia Borgia herself is said to have used these dangerous recipes daily for over 2 decades, and women across Europe spent fortunes to imitate her routine. Imagine willingly coating your lips with mercury every morning, fully aware of its toxicity. That's exactly what countless women did, because in that world, failing to meet the demands of beauty could ruin one's reputation more surely than the slow agony of poisoning. The cosmetic trade of the Middle Ages existed in a strange twilight between medicine, alchemy, and lethal chemistry. As historian Dr. Monica Green has pointed out in her research, Making Women's Medicine Masculine, many cosmetic makers were the same artisans who compounded medicines and occasionally brewed poisons for political assassinations. The boundary between beautifying and killing was razor thin. One striking case is that of Master Giovanni di, a Venetian cosmetic expert whose clients in the 1450s included some of the most powerful nobles of Europe. His miraculous beauty waters, praised for making women look divine, were later discovered by Venetian authorities to be diluted versions of the very concoctions he sold to assassins. Among his catalog, the most prized formula was Aqua Tanna, named for Giulia Tanna, a Sicilian woman who perfected a clear, flavorless liquid that could double as both face tonic and discreet poison. Noble women applied it for a radiant glow, unaware they were slowly ingesting the same compound used to dispatch inconvenient husbands and rivals. What makes this even more fascinating is not ignorance, but sophistication. Women of the Renaissance were acutely aware that their cosmetics were hazardous. They even developed classification systems to measure risk. Isabella d'Este, one of the most cultured women of her time, kept a beauty journal where she rated her products from 1 to 5, skulls 5 signifying potions so dangerous they could only be worn once a week. This wasn't blind vanity, it was calculated risk management. These women were effectively gambling with their lives, but with a chemist's precision. The crown jewel of medieval cosmetics was Venetian ceruse, a luminous white face paint, whose recipe reveals just how deadly the industry had become. Archival records from the Venetian state detail its manufacture. White lead left to ferment in horse manure for half a year, then blended with vinegar and egg whites under carefully controlled heat. Workers seldom lived beyond their 30s, yet the demand was so immense that the government offered tax breaks to sustain production. And the experiments didn't stop with lead and mercury. Surviving recipes list ingredients such as arsenic for a porcelain complexion, strychnine for energized skin, and belladonna extract dropped directly into the eyes to create dilated pupils. Avicenna's writings confirm how common this practice became in Italy, so much so that men began to favor women with unnaturally wide, dark pupils, never realizing they were admiring symptoms of poisoning. The consequences were devastating. City court records recount countless tragedies of brides-to-be collapsing from cosmetic poisoning mere weeks before their weddings. Perhaps the most heartbreaking was Lady Anne Beaujeu, sister of King Charles VIII of France. After 2 years of elaborate treatments, including mercury lip stains, arsenic powders, and lead-based paints, she died 3 days before her marriage at just 19. Physicians called it beauty sickness, but modern scholars recognize the classic signs of lead and mercury poisoning. Even more chilling, her younger sister began following the exact same deadly routine, believing Anne had never looked more beautiful than in death. The scale of the cosmetic economy was staggering. By 1500, makeup was one of Europe's largest consumer industries, with dedicated trade routes funneling toxic substances from across the known world. Venice exported tens of thousands of lead-based products annually, while Florence became famous for mercury lip colors shipped as far as England and Poland. Regional preferences emerged as well. Spanish women prized antimony eye paints from North Africa. Germans favored arsenic compounds from the East, while Italians perfected belladonna preparations for their eyes. Beauty itself became a map of global trade. What's striking is the blend of danger and ingenuity. Far from being passive victims, medieval women experimented, tested, and refined. The 14th century Manual Ornatus Mulierum outlines methods for trialing new cosmetics, checking for impurities, and gradually increasing user-friendly forms of product testing and quality control. Some noble women even established underground support networks, sharing antidotes and recovery recipes for cosmetic poisoning. But perhaps the most astonishing revelation is how normalized it all became. These women knew their powders and paints might kill them, yet they persisted because the social cost of looking plain felt even greater. Their routines reveal not foolishness, but determination, the willingness to master chemistry, endure pain, and gamble with health for the sake of status. And just when you think medieval beauty standards couldn't possibly grow more dangerous, the story turns even stranger. Because while women risked their lives with mercury and lead, another shocking fashion trend spread across Europe, this time involving not the skin but the smile. In an age when sugar was rarer than gold, rotting teeth became the ultimate display of wealth. We're about to step into the bizarre world of medieval dentistry, where blackened smiles were celebrated, healthy teeth were scorned, and people quite literally paid fortunes to have their mouths deliberately destroyed in the name of beauty. The surviving beauty manuals of the period even contain illustrated instructions on how to scorch decorative lines into tooth enamel with heated wires or use controlled acid burns to produce specific shades of discoloration. What's striking is that medieval people weren't unaware of the risks. Contemporary medical treatises openly discuss the pain, infections, and malnutrition that followed advanced dental decay. Yet demand for deliberate tooth modification only increased, because the rewards in status and desirability outweighed the cost in health. The industry built around this obsession became surprisingly large. Records from mercantile guilds show that sugar importers actually marketed their wares as luxury products for intentional tooth damage. Venetian traders developed concentrated blends known as dental sugars, advertised as tools for achieving the fashionable sugar smile. These weren't teas sold in apothecaries. They were displayed next to silk gowns and jeweled ornaments as emblems of aristocratic taste. But the impact went beyond appearance. Strategically damaged teeth also transformed the way people spoke. The gaps and decay patterns altered pronunciation, producing distinctive accents that quickly became markers of class refinement. Linguist Dr. Laura Wright, in her work, Sources of London English, argues that the nobility effectively developed a dental dialect, a mode of speech possible only with decayed teeth. Pronouncing certain words correctly required precise gaps, making dental destruction not just a beauty trend, but a social language. The psychological toll of these fashions was intense. Diarists and personal letters revealed nobles tormented by the fear that their teeth looked too healthy or too plain. Some became obsessed, consulting multiple specialists to refine their decay to perfection. The tragic story of Count Roderick de Montfort illustrates the extremity of this fixation. Chronicles from the Abbey of Santini recount how he spent more than 7 years subjecting himself to dental modification in pursuit of the ultimate sugar smile. The treatments left him unable to chew solid food, but he insisted on continuing, convinced that his ruined teeth made him more desirable as a husband. This craze also deepened class divisions. Because sugar and tooth artists were costly, only the wealthy could afford intentional decay. Commoners, stuck with naturally healthy smiles, were instantly marked as low status. Historians call this the dental divide, a visible separation between social classes etched into people's mouths. Court documents even show that employers sometimes listed refined dental appearance as a qualification for positions involving interaction with nobles, meaning candidates had to display deliberate signs of sugar consumption to be deemed suitable. Studying this phenomenon reveals not foolishness, but calculation. These individuals weren't blindly destroying their health, they were making deliberate, costly choices to signal wealth, education, and belonging in a culture where a smile could secure or shatter one's future. In its own way, it mirrors our modern obsession with dental perfection. Today, we spend fortunes whitening and straightening our teeth, while medieval elites invested equally large sums in making theirs crooked and dark. The aesthetics have flipped, but the underlying urge to communicate status through the mouth remains remarkably unchanged. And yet, teeth were only one piece of a much larger puzzle, because in the medieval world, beauty didn't stop at the smile. Next, we step into the intricate universe of hair culture, where every strand carried meaning. Hairstyles functioned as coded language, signaling a woman's marital status, political loyalties, religious devotion, or even her availability for courtship. One misplaced braid could endanger a marriage alliance, while the perfect coiffure could alter the course of diplomacy. Consider Queen Blanche of Castile, whose hair demanded a team of attendants working in shifts and incorporated over 40 pounds of extensions and ornaments. For her and her contemporaries, hair was more than fashion, it was power woven strand by strand. Tax records from cities across Europe reveal that businesses connected to her ranged from the trade of extensions to professional styling services, and the manufacture of specialized tools employed thousands and generated immense wealth. Venice went so far as to establish an entire district devoted exclusively to the hair trade, while Paris implemented guild regulations for hair artisans that were even more elaborate than those for physicians or legal professionals. What fascinates me most when studying medieval hair culture is the way it exposes the extraordinary complexity of social communication during the period. These were far from simple societies. Individuals had to navigate intricate codes and subtle visual signals, and mastering these rules demanded considerable knowledge and skill. Every hairstyle conveyed a deliberate message. Every braid, twist, or coil was a purposeful choice with social repercussions. It's striking how closely this mirrors our modern approach to hair, isn't it? Today, we still use our hairstyles to broadcast identity, signal status, and assert belonging. While the symbols have changed, the underlying principle is remarkably similar. Just as a medieval noblewoman would select a braid pattern to indicate political alliances, someone today might choose a haircut color or style to express cultural affiliation or professional identity. The clothing industry that grew around these ideals was remarkably advanced. Medieval tailors produced undergarments designed specifically to reshape the female form centuries before the invention of modern shape, known as fertility forms or breeding bodices. These garments incorporated whalebone, metal wiring, and carefully placed padding to achieve the perfect silhouette, regardless of a woman's natural figure. Master tailor Robert Latea, whose workshop records survive in national archives, charged exorbitant fees for bespoke designs, capable of transforming any body type into the era's ideal. His clientele included queens, duches, and the wives of wealthy merchants, all striving to achieve the perpetually near-pregnant look that defined medieval notions of beauty. Medieval body standards were not purely about fertility. They also communicated wealth and social rank in a society plagued by food scarcity. Soft, pale flesh indicated a life free from manual labor, access to plentiful rich foods, and, in some cases, excess weight a clear symbol of Conversely, thinness suggested poverty or ill health. These contradictory pressures led to complex behaviors. Wealthy women sought to appear both indulgent and fertile simultaneously, carefully balancing the appearance of prosperity with reproductive potential, delicate aesthetic requiring considerable time, money, and effort. The economic implications of this obsession were substantial. Guild records from multiple European cities show that the body modification sector, including specialized corsets, padding systems, and fertility-enhancing garments, employed thousands of skilled craftsmen and generated significant wealth. Venice even designated an entire district to the business of body shaping, while Paris enacted guild rules for form sculptors more rigorous than those for armor makers. Medieval literature and art reflect these ideals consistently. The romance Randella Rose praises women with bellies like gentle hillsoft, round, and full of promise, while paintings from the period frequently depict noble women with a distinctive pale, softly rounded forms that defined the era's standards. Religious beliefs deeply influenced these body ideals as well. Theological texts emphasized that a woman's body was most beautiful when it manifested her divine purpose, bearing children and continuing the family lineage. This spiritual dimension imposed intense psychological pressure. Letters and diaries revealed that women fretted over whether their bodies looked fertile enough, even when they were already mothers of multiple children. Some became obsessed with achieving the perfect breeding form, investing vast sums, and enduring serious health consequences in pursuit of the medieval ideal. Lady Catherine de Vallière exemplifies the extreme lengths to which women went. French National Archives document that Catherine spent over 5 years, vast amounts of money on increasingly hazardous body modification practices. She wore evititer corsets, ingested substances that induced dangerous water retention, and ultimately suffered severe organ damage, a tragic testament to the pressures of medieval beauty standards. These standards also reinforced social hierarchies. Achieving the ideal shape required both expensive garments and time for sculpting. giving wealthy women a visible marker of privilege. Women of lower means were left with their natural forms, marking them as lower class by prevailing standards. The so-called body divide was so pronounced that prospective employees were sometimes evaluated on their silhouettes before being hired for positions involving interaction with affluent clients, with explicit requirements for the characteristic medieval feminine form. Studying these practices underscores the profound influence of cultural conditioning on perceptions of beauty. The medieval preference for the fertile form was not a natural, universal standard. It was a socially learned response shaped by economic, religious, and cultural factors. Modern body ideals operate differently, favoring thinness, fitness, or muscular tone, but the underlying impulse remains unchanged. Humans continue to alter their bodies to align with prevailing beauty standards, signaling status, health, and desirability. As we continue our exploration of medieval beauty practices, we are about to enter a realm that engages the senses in entirely new ways. Next, we turn to the sophisticated world of medieval scent culture, where personal fragrance was far more than a matter of pleasant odor. It was a powerful social signal. Your chosen scents could convey everything from health and moral character to romantic availability. You'll encounter medieval perfume recipes still in use today. Meet master perfumers who commanded royal patronage, and learn about scent compositions so intricate that they required a specialized vocabulary. Step into a world where every inhalation communicated a story. Beyond the visual spectacle of sculpted bodies and elaborate hairstyles, medieval Europe waged an invisible battle of fragrance. This upcoming revelation will overturn the common myth that medieval people were dirty or in truth, they were obsessed with scent to a degree that makes modern perfume culture appear rudimentary. Complex olfactory profiles often included over 50 individual aromatic elements, each carefully selected for its social, medicinal, or spiritual significance. Entered the private chambers of Helena of Provence, Queen of England in 1254, and contemporary chronicles describe an atmosphere akin to paradise. Household accounts preserved in national archives note that Helena employed a team of 7 master perfumers solely dedicated to crafting her personal scent. Her fragrance was so distinctive that courtiers claimed they could identify her presence merely by its lingering aroma. Yet her perfume was more than pleasant. It was a precisely composed symphony of political signaling, health cues, and social positioning. Every ingredient carried meaning. Amber from distant Wales communicated international trade connections. Rare Indian sandalwood demonstrated wealth, and particular floral. According to the writings of medieval physicians like Avisa and other authorities of the time, a person's natural body odor was thought to reflect their immoral character, while the fragrances they chose to wear conveyed aspirations, social standing, and even political loyalties. This belief gave rise to a remarkably complex scent culture, where every decision about perfume or aromatic oils carried significant social implications. Dr. Susan Ashbrook Harvey, in her research Scenting Salvation, explains that medieval people believed certain fragrances could literally influence personality, enhance health, and shape how others perceived a person's character and societal value. The most coveted perfumes of the era were extraordinarily expensive, sometimes requiring ingredients that would surpass the lifetime earnings of most individuals. Take, for example, the legendary Rosa Mystica, crafted for noble women of immense wealth. Its creation required rose petals blessed by bishop's ambergris, aged for 7 years in monasteries, and gold dust sanctified during religious ceremonies. One renowned perfumer, Master Hotasque de Montpellier, whose workshop records survive in the archives of the Depardieu, designed what he called conversation perfumes. These were specialized blends intended to make the wearer more persuasive during negotiations, more alluring during courtship, or more intimidating in disputes. His clientele included kings, queens, and influential merchants, many of whom credited their personal and professional success to his aromatic expertise. Imagine having a unique perfume for every social scenario. That was the sophistication of medieval scent culture. Wealthy individuals often owned dozens of fragrances, each formulated for a distinct occasion or purpose. Medieval perfume manuals illustrate just how advanced this aromatic science had become. The 14th century beauty guide Libre d'Arte Distillandi contains over 200 detailed perfume recipes, including instructions for concoctions designed to make the wearer appear younger, more intelligent, more fertile, or spiritually purified. Some recipes required months of preparation and ingredients imported from across the known world. A particularly fascinating aspect of this culture was aromatic storytelling. Nobles often created signature scents that narrated their personal histories through smell. Court records reveal that Elelenina of Aquitaine's famed fragrance incorporated components representing pivotal moments in her life. Jasmine from her childhood in France, cedar from her travels in the Holy Land during the Crusades, and English lavender from her years as Queen of England. Regional perfume traditions also reflected the sophistication of international trade networks. Dr. Paul Friedman, in Out of the East, details how European regions developed distinct scent profiles that became cultural identifiers. French courts favored intricate floral blends, symbolizing elegance and refinement. Italian city-states preferred bold, spicy aromas signaling wealth and cosmopolitanism. English nobles cultivated garden perfumes that recreated the experience of elaborate seasonal gardens, while German imperial courts leaned toward philosophical fragrances that combined incense and resins. Associated with learning and contemplation, perfume culture extended beyond personal fragrance. Wealthy households followed strict aromatic protocols to communicate status, values, and social ambitions. Management manuals from the period describe how families maintained distinct scent profiles for different rooms, seasons, and social functions. Economically, perfume had become a powerhouse commodity by 1400. Perfumers also pioneered advanced techniques for creating and preserving scents. Archaeological finds across Europe reveal sophisticated distillation equipment, specialized aging vessels designed to enhance aromas, and early versions of devices resembling modern perfume atomizer. Master Giovanni da Finzi's Florentine workshop, documented in guild records, employed methods akin to contemporary perfumery. Aging select ingredients for years, blending components according to precise mathematical ratio, and even conducting early focus group trials across social classes to perfect formulations. Remarkably, medieval people recognized the psychological and physiological effects of fragrances in ways that prefigure modern aromatherapy. Medical texts prescribe specific scents for mental and emotional conditions. Lavender for anxiety, rosemary to boost memory, and intricate blends to treat melancholia, a condition we would now identify as depression. Perfume also shaped gender dynamics. Contrary to the assumption that fragrance was primarily a feminine concern, men were equally invested. Knights applied scents before battle to bolster courage. Scholars used aromas to enhance mental acuity, and merchants selected perfumes to project trustworthiness and prosperity. William Marshall, one of England's greatest knights, reportedly had a signature battle fragrance, combining frankincense for divine protection, cedar for strength, and herbs intended to intimidate opponents. Fellow knights sometimes sought to replicate these formulas, believing they could absorb some of Marshall's prowess through scent alone. Religious beliefs intertwined with fragrance culture as well. Scents were associated with saints, virtues, and spiritual states. Pilgrims carried fragrances honoring the saints they visited, while nobles selected aromas linked to their patron saints or religious celebrations. This spiritual dimension produced some of the most expensive and elaborate perfumes in medieval history. The famed celestial rose, crafted for devout noblewomen, required ingredients blessed by multiple religious authorities across Europe and was considered a form of prayer in itself, affordable only to queens and the wealthiest duchesses. What stands out most when studying medieval scent culture is the extraordinary sophistication of their social communication. These were not primitive people with basic sensory awareness. They understood the psychological and social power of fragrance and wielded it with deliberate intent. Much as we now use social media or professional networking to project identity and influence, there are striking parallels to modern fragrance culture. Selecting the perfect scent for a diplomatic negotiation in medieval courts is not so different from choosing a signature perfume today to express a professional image or a personal brand. As we continue exploring medieval beauty practices, the next frontier is bathing cultura realm, where cleanliness transcended mere hygiene. Medieval bathing was a highly elaborate social ritual, often spanning several days, requiring dozens of specialists, and costing more than most people earned in an entire year. Noble bathhouses rivaled modern spas, staffed by bathmasters who commanded royal patronage and oversaw cleansing ceremonies so intricate they became forms of entertainment. These practices revealed that medieval people weren't merely clean, were obsessed with purification in ways that would put contemporary wellness culture to shame. While perfume filled European air with invisible symbols of luxury, something equally revolutionary was taking place in the bathing chambers of London, Paris, and Constantinople. Medieval bathing was so sophisticated that it rendered modern spa treatments rudimentary by comparison. Forget any preconceived notions about the dirty Middle Ages. These cleansing rituals could take days, require enormous expense, and often surpass the value of entire estates. Imagine stepping into the private bathing chamber of Philippa of Hainault, Queen of England in 1347, where chroniclers describe the most divine purification in Christendom. Royal wardrobe records in the National Archives detail her weekly bathing ritual. 3 full days, a team of 23 specialists, and ingredients valued higher than most nobles' annual income. Yet, this was not merely hygiene, it was an elaborate ceremony that fused medicine, spirituality, social display, and beauty enhancement, transforming both body and soul. The process began with water physicians testing and blessing the bathing liquids, continued with aromatherapy specialists crafting custom scent blends for different stages of the ritual, and culminated in what medieval texts called the rebirth purification, leaving Philippa appearing decades younger. Bathing was deeply rooted in contemporary medical theories, which linked cleanliness to health, beauty, and moral purity. Authorities such as Taido Alderati describe bathing as a practice capable of improving complexion, extending lifespan, refining character, and enhancing spiritual connection. Medieval bath masters, known as Ban, underwent extensive training to understand how water temperature, mineral composition, and aromatic additions influenced health and appearance. They maintained detailed charts mapping optimal bathing routines according to astrology, seasonal shifts, and individual constitution. The most luxurious baths used water infused with ingredients that were extraordinarily costly. Imperial formulas called for spring water, blessed by bishops, heated with precious woods like sandalwood and cedar, and enriched with dissolved pearls, powdered gold, and rare herbs, imported from India and China. Imagine immersing yourself in water containing actual pearls and gold dust, but to medieval nobility. This was essential for proper purification and beauty enhancement. Bathhouses themselves were architectural marvels, rivaling modern spa complexes. Archaeological evidence reveals multiple chambers for various stages of bathing, precise heating systems, and even rudimentary hydrotherapy jets and mineral pools. The renowned baths of Trier, described in medieval records, featured more than 30 chambers tailored for therapeutic, cosmetic, and relaxation purposes. Patrons could enjoy hot mineral baths for joint health, cold plunges to stimulate circulation, herbal-infused steam rooms, and beauty baths designed to enhance skin and hair quality. Perhaps most striking was the social aspect of bathing. Public bathhouses served as sophisticated centers for networking, negotiation, and alliance building. Records indicate that wealthy merchants and nobles frequently rented entire facilities for elaborate events that combined cleansing, dining, entertainment, and social maneuvering. Economically, the bathhouse industry was substantial. Guild records show it employed thousands, including water carriers, fire tenders, herbalists, massage therapists, and entertainers who provided music and storytelling during extended rituals. Regional variations were pronounced. French bathhouses emphasized luxury and sensual pleasure, featuring silk-lined tubs and elaborate aromatic treatments. German baths focused on health and therapeutic benefits using mineral-rich waters. Italian bathhouses combined Roman traditions with medieval innovations to create social hubs akin to private clubs. And English bathhouses developed purification protocols, blending physical cleansing with spiritual rites, including prayers, blessed water, and ceremonial acts that elevated bathing into a sacred experience. These weren't merely baths, they were transformative, multisensory rituals that cleansed both body and soul. The techniques used in medieval bathing were surprisingly advanced and scientifically sound. Master bath attendants understood the therapeutic properties of different minerals, the optimal temperatures for various health conditions, and the psychological effects of different aromatic combinations. They created personalized bathing regimens that functioned like modern wellness programs, addressing individual health concerns and beauty goals. The famous bathmaster, Johannes Diocchi, whose treatment records are preserved in the archives of the University of Montpellier, developed what he called constitutional bathing, customized cleansing programs based on individual body types, health conditions, and astrological profiles. His wealthy clients would travel hundreds of miles to receive his personalized treatments, which could take weeks to complete and required staying in residence at his elaborate facility. Medieval people also understood the connection between bathing and beauty in ways that anticipate modern skincare science. Different water temperatures and mineral compositions were known to affect skin texture, hair quality, and overall appearance. Bathmasters would create specific treatments for different beauty goals, softening baths for rough skin, clarifying treatments for complexion problems, and strengthening formulas for hair health. Perhaps, most remarkably, medieval bathing culture included sophisticated understanding of what we now call aromatherapy and hydrotherapy. Different herb combinations were used to achieve specific psychological and physical effects. Lavender for relaxation, rosemary for mental clarity, and complex blends for what medieval physicians called beauty enhancement and youth preservation. The religious dimension of medieval bathing created some of the most elaborate and expensive cleansing rituals in human history. Wealthy Christians would undergo what they called pilgrimage baths, purification ceremonies that prepared them for religious journeys or major life events. These rituals could take weeks to complete and involved ingredients and procedures that cost enormous amounts of money. The famous Crusader purification ritual documented in various medieval chronicles required participants to bathe in waters that had been blessed by multiple religious authorities, enhanced with holy relics, and heated using wood from sacred groves. Knights preparing for the Holy Land would spend months undergoing these purification processes, believing they would provide divine protection and spiritual strength. Medieval bathing culture also created fascinating gender dynamics that challenge our assumptions about medieval society. While we might think of medieval women as restricted and powerless, bathhouse culture was one area where they often held significant authority and independence. Many baths were owned and operated by women, and female bathmasters commanded high fees and social respect for their expertise. The famous Trotula of Salerno, whose medical writings include extensive discussions of bathing for health and beauty, established bathing protocols that were followed across Europe for centuries. Her treatments specifically addressed women's health and beauty concerns, creating a female-centered approach to wellness that was remarkably advanced for its time. Medieval bathing also intersected with medical practice in sophisticated ways. Physicians would prescribe specific bathing regimens for different health conditions, and bathmasters worked closely with medical professionals to create therapeutic treatments. This wasn't just about luxury or comfort. This was serious medical practice that used water therapy as a primary treatment modality. What strikes me most about studying medieval bathing culture is how it reveals the incredible sophistication of medieval understanding about health, beauty, and wellness. These weren't primitive people who rarely washed. They were individuals who understood the complex connections between cleanliness, health, and social success, and who developed elaborate systems to optimize all of these factors. This creates such interesting parallels with modern wellness culture, doesn't it? Today, we have spas, aromatherapy, hydrotherapy, and personalized wellness, programs that echo many of the same principles the medieval people understood centuries ago. The specific techniques have evolved, but that fundamental understanding of bathing as a holistic health and beauty practice remains remarkably consistent across centuries. As we continue exploring these remarkable medieval beauty practices, we're about to enter a realm that will completely transform your understanding of medieval fashion and its relationship to physical attractiveness. Next, we're diving into the sophisticated world of medieval clothing as beauty enhancement, where fashion wasn't just about looking stylish. It was a complex system of body modification that could completely reshape your physical appearance, communicate your social status, and even influence your health and behavior. You'll discover medieval shapewear that rivaled modern engineering, meet the master tailor who commanded royal fees, and learn about clothing technologies so advanced they wouldn't be reinvented until the industrial age. Prepare to uncover how medieval people literally sculpted their bodies using fabric, thread, and revolutionary construction techniques that redefined human silhouettes. The sophisticated bathing rituals we just explored were only the beginning of medieval beauty transformation. Because once medieval people emerged from their elaborate cleansing ceremonies, they faced an even more complex challenge, using clothing to literally reshape their bodies into completely different forms. What I'm about to reveal will revolutionize everything you think you know about medieval fashion. Because these weren't just clothes. They were architectural marvels of engineering that could make a short person appear tall, a thin person look voluptuous, and completely transform someone's social status with a few strategic fabric choices. Meet Joan of Kent, the Fair Maid of Kent, and one of 14th century England's most celebrated beauties whose legendary attractiveness had almost nothing to do with her natural appearance. According to detailed wardrobe accounts preserved in the Chancery rolls, Joan's famous figure was entirely artificial, created through a sophisticated system of padding, structural supports, and optical illusions that required a team of specialized dressmakers working for months to perfect each outfit. But here's what makes Joan's story truly extraordinary. Her natural measurements, recorded by court tailor for fitting purposes, reveal that without her elaborate clothing modifications, she would have been considered quite ordinary by medieval standards, relatively short with a straight waist and small bust. Yet through masterful use of medieval fashion technology, she transformed herself into what chroniclers described as Venus herself walking among mortals. The medieval understanding of beauty through clothing was based on sophisticated theories about proportion, color, psychology, and social communication that wouldn't be matched until the development of modern fashion psychology. According to the writings of medieval scholars like Vincent of Beauve and other authorities preserved in various European libraries, clothing didn't just cover the body. It could literally change a person's character, health, and social destiny. Medieval tailor called sartors were among the most highly trained craftspeople in Europe, studying for years to master techniques that combined engineering, artistry, and what amounted to primitive psychology. The most skilled masters could create garments that not only transformed physical appearance, but actually influenced how the wearer moved, spoke, and interacted with others. The famous Master Gomez, whose workshop records are preserved in the Archives National, created what he called transformation garments, clothing so sophisticated that wearing them literally changed the wearer's personality and social presence. His wealthy clients would commission entire wardrobes designed to make them appear more intelligent, more fertile, more noble, or more spiritually pure, depending on their specific social goals. Can you imagine owning clothes that were designed to change your personality? But that's exactly how sophisticated medieval fashion psychology had become. Different garment styles were believed to influence not just how others perceived you, but how you perceived yourself. Medieval clothing construction used techniques that weren't rediscovered until the Industrial Revolution. Archaeological analysis of preserved medieval garments reveals sophisticated internal structures, including primitive forms of what we might recognize as underwire support, strategic padding systems that could add or subtract apparent body mass in specific areas, and even mechanical elements that could alter the wearer's posture and gait. The famous Biagandian silhouette, popular in 15th century courts, required garments with internal frameworks, made from whale, bone, metal wire, and carefully shaped wooden supports that essentially turned the human body into a living sculpture. According to detailed tailoring manuals preserved in various European libraries, creating these garments required mathematical calculations to ensure proper proportions and structural integrity. Regional fashion styles created completely different beauty ideals through clothing alone. According to Dr. Margaret Scott's extensive research in medieval dress and fashion, French courts developed what they called la forme céleste, clothing styles that made women appear taller and more ethereal through strategic use of vertical lines, flowing fabrics, and optical illusions created through color placement. Italian city-states preferred former Magnifica styles that emphasized wealth and sophistication through elaborate decorative elements, expensive materials, and silhouettes that suggested both prosperity and fertility. German imperial courts created daedalist forms that communicated social rank and intellectual capacity through specific proportions and symbolic elements. English courts developed perhaps the most complex clothing beauty system, creating what they called virtue garments, clothing specifically designed to make the wearer appear more morally pure and spiritually elevated. These weren't just beautiful clothes. They were wearable moral statements that communicated the wearer's character and social worth. The economic impact of this clothing beauty industry was staggering, according to trade records from various European ports. Luxury textiles and specialized tailoring services had become one of the largest categories of international commerce by 1400. Venice alone exported clothing worth millions in today's currency, while Florence specialized in creating garments so elaborate they took years to complete and required their own specialized vocabulary to describe. Medieval fashion also developed sophisticated color psychology that anticipated modern understanding of how different hues affect perception and mood. According to various medieval treatises on clothing and social presentation, specific color combinations were known to make the wearer appear younger, healthier, more intelligent, or more attractive to potential marriage partners. The famous color of virtue system, documented in multiple medieval fashion guides, assigned specific psychological and social meanings to different hues and their combinations. Blue suggested divine favor and spiritual purity. Gold indicated connection to the divine and royal authority, while deep red communicated passion and fertility, but only when combined with the correct secondary colors and worn in the proper social context. Perhaps most remarkably, medieval clothing included sophisticated understanding of what we now call body language and nonverbal communication. Different garment styles were designed to encourage specific postures, gestures, and movement patterns that would enhance the wearer's social effectiveness and attractiveness. The famous comportment gowns, created for wealthy noble women, actually trained their wearers to move in ways that communicated specific social messages. Long trains required graceful, deliberate movement that suggested refinement and high status. Fitted sleeves encouraged elegant arm gestures that drew attention to the hands and suggested delicate femininity. Strategic padding created silhouettes that demanded specific postures associated with fertility and nobility. Medieval fashion also intersected with medical theory in complex ways. Different clothing styles were believed to influence the wearer's health by affecting circulation, posture, and what medieval physicians called humoral balance. Tight-fitting garments were thought to improve moral character by encouraging, while flowing robes were believed to enhance spiritual contemplation and intellectual capacity. The religious dimension of medieval fashion created some of the most elaborate and expensive clothing in human history. Wealthy Christians would commission what they called pilgrimage garments, clothing specifically designed for religious observances that combined beauty enhancement with spiritual symbolism. These weren't just beautiful clothes. They were wearable prayers that communicated the wearer's devotion while enhancing their physical attractiveness. Medieval fashion also created fascinating social mobility opportunities that challenge our assumptions about medieval society's rigid class structure. According to various court records and guild documentation, skilled tailor could essentially sell social transformation, creating clothing that allowed merchants to appear noble, or helping minor nobles compete with higher-ranking aristocrats through superior fashion choices. The famous case of Margherita d'Autun, wife of a wealthy 14th-century Italian merchant, illustrates how clothing could literally change someone's social destiny. According to the detailed account books preserved in Prideaux's archives, Margherita invested enormous sums in clothing designed to make her appear nobler rather than merchant class. Her calculated fashion choices proved so effective that she eventually gained acceptance into aristocratic circles, earning invitations to courtly events, typically reserved for those of hereditary nobility. The craft of medieval tailoring had also reached astonishingly advanced levels, especially in addressing what we might now consider personal body image concerns. Master tailors designed specialized garments for clients who were self-conscious about specific physical traits, clothing that could make someone seem taller, shorter, slimmer, fuller, or more proportionate, depending on their insecurities and social ambitions. The technical ingenuity of these garments becomes clear through archaeological studies of preserved medieval clothing. Many included adjustable internal structures to adapt to different occasions, reversible components that allowed multiple looks from a single piece, and early forms of what we would now call shapewear technology. What fascinates me most about exploring medieval fashion as a tool for beauty enhancement is how it demonstrates the extraordinary creativity and technical mastery of medieval artisans. These weren't primitive craftspersons producing simple garments. They were engineers and artists who understood the intricate interplay between clothing, psychology, social signaling, and physical allure. This draws such striking parallels with contemporary fashion culture, doesn't it? Today, we still use clothing to express identity, refine our appearance, and influence perceptions. The techniques may have evolved, but the core understanding of fashion as a mechanism for personnel transformation remains remarkably consistent across the centuries. As we continue delving into these extraordinary medieval beauty practices, we are about to enter a realm that will radically expand your understanding of how people of the Middle Ages navigated the intricate intersection of aesthetics, identity, and geography. Next, we will explore the captivating world of regional beauty competition, where various regions of medieval Europe developed entirely distinct standards of attractiveness, giving rise to what can only be described as international beauty rivalries that shaped politics, trade, and cultural identity for generations. You will learn how the courts of France, England, Italy, and Germany each cultivated their own visions of perfection. Meet the beauty ambassadors dispatched across borders to collect intelligence on competing standards, and uncover the stories of diplomatic marriages, won or lost, because of conflicting perceptions of what constituted beauty. Prepare to enter a medieval world in which aesthetic ideals were far more than private tastes. They were instruments of cultural power and influence. The elaborate clothing transformations we've just examined contributed to more than individual allure. They were a driving force in what can only be termed international beauty warfare. Distinct regions maintained standards so incompatible that they could spark diplomatic crises, trade disputes, and even jeopardize marriage negotiations. You are about to witness a medieval landscape where physical attractiveness functioned as a weapon of cultural dominance, shaping international relations for centuries. Take, for instance, the notorious beauty crisis of 1396. Negotiations for the marriage of French Princess Isabella to English King Richard II nearly collapsed because French and English courts held such drastically different ideals of feminine beauty that they could not even agree on whether Isabella was beautiful. Diplomatic correspondence preserved in the French and English National Archives reveals that French ambassadors praised Isabella as the epitome of feminine perfection, while English courtiers dismissed her as nothing more than a pale, oddly appearing French girl. Yet this was not mere snobbery. It was a collision of two entirely distinct aesthetic systems that had developed in isolation for centuries. Regional beauty competitions also fostered cultural exchange and rapid innovation. Courts losing aesthetic wars dispatched envoys to study rivals' techniques, facilitating the spread of successful practices. Italian complexion methods reached French courts within decades, while German hairstyling techniques spread across Northern Europe. These exchanges were not mere imitation. They were sophisticated forms of cultural espionage, with courts deliberately seeding false information to protect their most effective secrets. The Venetian Circe formula, for instance, was so closely guarded that sharing it abroad was considered treason. Medieval chronicles abound with accounts of what we might now term beauty diplomacy. International negotiations and marital alliances often succeeded or failed, depending on the compatibility of beauty ideals. Northern European courts generally equated physical beauty with inner virtue and divine favor, whereas Mediterranean societies developed nuanced theories linking attractiveness to social and functional purposes. These divergent philosophies fueled some of the most intricate aesthetic debates in medieval intellectual history, with scholars formally disputing whether beauty was universal or culturally defined, whether certain physical traits indicated personality, and how appearance related to moral and spiritual worth. The influence of these regional beauty wars extended far beyond Europe. Merchants and diplomats carried European standards to Asia, Africa, and eventually the Americas, seeding complex exchanges that helped shape global beauty concepts. Medieval Europeans were remarkably aware that appearance could be wielded as a tool of cultural power, identity, expression, and social influence. These were not societies guided by primitive aesthetic preferences. They were sophisticated civilizations, employing appearance strategically to assert values, gain status, and demonstrate superiority. This parallels modern global beauty culture in striking ways. Today, Nations and cities promote distinct aesthetic ideals to project influence, much as the French court once championed ethereal elegance. As our journey through medieval beauty culture continues, we are about to confront the darkest chapter, the lethal extremes of these beauty practices. Next, we'll examine the point at which enhancement turned deadly, creating some of the most tragic and fatal trends in human history. You will meet victims whose suffering was concealed by courts and discover the underground movements that sought to protect women from fatal beauty standards. Prepare for the harrowing reality of what occurred when medieval obsession with attractiveness became a weapon against life itself. After witnessing centuries of intense regional beauty, rivalry, and innovation, we must now confront the moment when desire for physical perfection crossed an irreversible line. What follows represents a chilling chapter in beauty history, where social pressure and aesthetic obsession transformed enhancement into a slow, often fatal, pursuit. The turning point arrived in 1348, during what historians call the Great Dying Knot, solely due to the Black Death sweeping Europe, but compounded by an epidemic of so-called beauty plague, a spate of deaths within noble households caused by increasingly hazardous cosmetic practices. Medical records preserved in the Vatican's archives detail unprecedented numbers of young women succumbing to what physicians euphemistically termed vanity sickness, a systematic poisoning arising from dangerous beauty rituals. Lady Catherine Dare embodies this tragic phenomenon. Chronicled meticulously in the Chronicles of Feuillard, her story illustrates the lethal extremes of medieval cosmetic obsession. Desperate to achieve the flawless, pale complexion demanded by 14th century fashion, Catherine applied progressively concentrated lead-based makeup for over 3 years. By 19, her physician's journals report severe neurological damage, kidney failure, and what contemporaries called beauty madness, leading to psychosis that left her unable to recognize the lethal connection between her cosmetics and her declining health. Yet even as Catherine deteriorated, she persisted, convinced that ceasing her toxic regimen would render her unattractive beyond hope. Her final diary entry, preserved in the British Library, reads hauntingly, "Better to die beautiful than live as a monster." She passed away within a single week. Catherine was far from alone. Research conducted by Dr. Carol Roarcliffe on medicine and society in late medieval England reveals that by 1350, deaths related to beauty practices had become so common among noble women that physicians had developed an entirely new medical vocabulary dedicated to recording cosmetic poisoning cases. They identified more than 40 distinct categories of beauty-related illnesses, from mercury-induced madness to arsenic-fueled skin decay, and even what was known as the Silver Death, a lethal consequence of expensive silver-based cosmetics. The economic pressures we have traced throughout this journey had fostered a beauty industry that literally profited from the demise of its clients. Trade records preserved in multiple European archives show that cosmetic producers deliberately intensified the toxicity of their products. More dangerous formulations delivered dramatic short-term effects, allowing merchants to command higher prices and attract wealthy customers willing to pay for extreme results. The notorious Phoenician Cosmetic Guild, whose internal documents were uncovered in the 18th century, even calculated what they called acceptable casualty rates, an estimate of how many customer deaths per year the guild could tolerate while remaining profitable. In essence, these manufacturers treated fatalities as a cost of doing business, much like modern companies calculate allowable accident rates in inherently risky industries. Imagine an industry where customer death was budgeted as an acceptable expense. This was the grim reality across medieval Europe, where the pursuit of beauty had become so detached from health and safety that dying for attractiveness was considered a price worth paying. Social pressure to adhere to these hazardous beauty standards was so overwhelming that women formed what were essentially support networks to manage cosmetic poisoning while continuing to apply lethal treatments. Monastery records and personal correspondences preserved across Europe document noblewomen secretly sharing antidotes, recovery strategies, and ways to conceal poisoning symptoms, all while persisting in the very practices that endangered their lives. Tragically, these deadly routines often perpetuated intergenerational cycles of harm. Mothers who survived years of toxic cosmetic use would pass both the practices and the accumulated health consequences onto their daughters. Medieval medical texts describe families where multiple generations of women died young from beauty-related poisoning. Yet the customs endured because the social cost of nonconformity seemed higher than the risk of death. The House of Montreni provides a chilling example. Detailed family records in the Archives National reveal that 5 consecutive generations of women died before reaching 25 due to cosmetic poisoning. Nevertheless, the family persisted with these practices, believing that maintaining a reputation for exceptional beauty was essential for social standing and marriage prospects. By 1360, church records indicate that beauty-related deaths had become so prevalent that special prayers and funeral rites were established, specifically for women who perished from vanity excesses. The church condemned vanity as sinful, while simultaneously creating elaborate ceremonies to honor the contradiction that exposes the moral ambivalence of medieval society toward these deadly practices. Resistance movements emerged in response to this crisis, often surprisingly organized and sophisticated. Monastery chronicles and underground documents reveal networks of physicians, priests, and concerned family members documenting the scope of beauty-related fatalities and experimenting with safer alternatives. Master William of Saliceto, whose writings survive in the University of Bologna archives, became one of the most vocal critics of these lethal practices. His treatise against the poison of vanity catalogued over 200 beauty-related deaths and provided detailed evidence of how cosmetic manufacturers deliberately increased the toxicity of their products to maximize profit. His activism provoked death threats from powerful guilds and eventually forced him into exile. Remarkably, much of the most innovative resistance came from women themselves. Personal letters and diary entries preserved across Europe show that some medieval women began developing safe beauty, modified versions of popular cosmetics designed to achieve similar visual effects with lower health risks. They created clandestine networks to share these safer formulas and even developed coded languages to discuss beauty practices without alerting authorities or industry spies. The economic consequences of beauty-related fatalities eventually became impossible to ignore. Tax records and guild documents indicate that the mortality rate among wealthy young women was so high that it disrupted inheritance patterns, marriage markets, and the economic stability of noble households. Families lost fortunes when daughters died before producing heirs, creating financial incentives to challenge the deadliest practices. Court records show repeated attempts to regulate the cosmetic industry and ban hazardous methods. But these initiatives were routinely undermined by both massive profits and the overwhelming social pressure to maintain extreme beauty standards. Manufacturers would relocate operations or create new formulations that technically complied with regulations while remaining equally dangerous. The psychological impact of this lethal beauty culture was profound. Medical treatises from the period describe what amounted to collective madness. Entire communities of women became so obsessed with impossible beauty ideals that rational self-preservation was abandoned. Physicians documented cases of women who continued to use cosmetics that visibly caused severe skin damage, hair loss, and neurological impairment. Studying this dark period is crucial because it shows the consequences of divorcing aesthetic culture from health, safety, and reason. These were not ignorant individuals. They were intelligent women ensnared by societal expectations that framed lethal beauty practices as necessary for social survival. This epidemic also reveals how commercial interests can exploit cultural values, creating standards that demand dangerous products while marketing them as essential for social acceptance and personal worth. Medieval chronicles captured the grief and helplessness of families who lost daughters to beauty culture. Attempts to hold cosmetic manufacturers accountable were routinely dismissed because women used the products voluntarily. Estimates suggest that in some noble households, mortality among young women from beauty practices may have reached 30%, a rate surpassing that of the plague in many regions. Yet, these deaths were often concealed or attributed to other causes to protect family reputation and maintain the illusion that cosmetic practices were safe. As we approach the final chapters of medieval beauty culture, we witnessed the critical moment when society began to separate myth from reality in cosmetic practices. This shift gave rise to the first systematic approaches for distinguishing genuinely effective beauty enhancements from dangerous superstition. Pioneering individuals challenged centuries of lethal traditions, developing methods to test and validate cosmetic claims scientifically. From the devastation of this epidemic, A remarkable intellectual movement emerged, the first evidence-based approach to beauty that would eventually evolve into modern cosmetic science. The catalyst for this revolution was an unlikely figure. Brother Albertus Magnus, a Dominican friar and scholar, in his 1260 treatise, Dominus. He produced what may be the first scientific analysis of cosmetic ingredients in European history. Unlike traditional beauty manuals, Albertus tested claims systematically, using observation and documentation rather than relying on inherited formulas. His experimental notes, preserved in the Cologne Cathedral Library, revealed over 5 years of what amounted to controlled studies on the effectiveness and safety of various beauty products. Albertus did not work alone. Research by Dr. Monica Green shows that a network of scholars, physicians, and surprisingly wealthy women, many survivors of cosmetic poisoning, elaborated to establish veritas pulchritudinus, or truth in beauty, the first organized method for evaluating cosmetic claims based on evidence rather than tradition or social pressure. This movement catalyzed some of the most significant scientific discoveries of the medieval period. Master Roger Bacon, working at Oxford in the 1260s, developed what he termed experimental beauty, testing popular formulations on controlled groups of volunteers and recording the results objectively. His findings, preserved in the Bodleian Library, systematically debunked numerous beauty myths while identifying a few practices that genuinely enhanced appearance. The courage required to challenge centuries of entrenched beliefs with empirical evidence was extraordinary. These pioneers were effectively informing wealthy, powerful patrons that cherished beauty traditions were not only false but often lethal. One of Bacon's most groundbreaking discoveries involved the widespread belief that consuming gold dissolved in wine improved complexion and prolonged youth. Through controlled trials with volunteers, many financially motivated university students, he proved that gold offered no beauty benefits, often causing digestive issues and, in some cases, serious poisoning. His documentation reads remarkably like a modern clinical study, complete with control groups and quantified results. Resistance to this scientific approach was intense and sometimes violent. Court records indicate that cosmetic guilds coordinated attacks against scholars challenging established practices. Master William of Saliceto, whom we met earlier, survived 3 assassination attempts by guild members who saw evidence-based reform as a direct threat to their profitable but deadly industry. Perhaps the most illuminating aspect of this medieval scientific revolution in beauty was how it exposed the vast gap between belief and reality. Systematic studies by scholars revealed that over 80% of popular beauty treatments had no measurable effect, while nearly 40% actively harmed health. A 1275 study conducted by the University of Montpellier Medical Faculty, documented in their academic archives, tested more than 200 common formulations, using beauty-proof systematic before and after evaluations observed by independent witnesses. The results were shocking. Most expensive treatments offered no visible improvement, while simple, inexpensive remedies, dismissed as peasant practices, often worked best. These investigations also uncovered the psychological dimension of beauty enhancement. Medieval scholars observed that people who believed they were using effective treatments often appeared more confident and attractive to others, regardless of physical change. A remarkable early recognition of placebo effects and social confirmation bias. Furthermore, they discovered that many cosmetic beliefs arose from basic misunderstandings of human physiology and appearance, revealing just how far medieval culture had diverged from reality in its pursuit of ideal beauty. The long-held notion that pale skin was a mark of nobility, for instance, came under rigorous scrutiny by scholars who demonstrated that skin tone was largely influenced by sun exposure and occupation rather than innate social status or moral character. In the 1270s, Master Thomas Aquinas developed what he called beauty logic, a systematic examination of the reasoning behind popular cosmetic practices. His manuscripts, preserved in several European libraries, meticulously dissected dozens of logical errors embedded in widespread beauty beliefs, from false cause and effect assumptions to unproven links between physical appearance and personal virtue. The ramifications of these discoveries were enormous. Trade records and guild archives reveal that much of the medieval beauty industry was built upon products and procedures that offered no real benefits, yet commanded exorbitant prices for elaborate, ineffectual treatments. As scholars began publishing evidence challenging the effectiveness of these practices, entire sectors of the beauty economy heavily reliant on consumer ignorance and social pressure faced potential collapse. These investigations also exposed how deeply medieval beauty culture had been manipulated through what we might now recognize as marketing tactics and social engineering. Cosmetic producers deliberately designed intricate, costly routines, often more to justify high prices than to produce tangible results. Scholars documented the clever psychological methods employed to convince patrons that these treatments were working, even when no visible improvements occurred. Perhaps most surprisingly, these medieval studies began to pinpoint the few practices that genuinely enhanced appearance. Evidence suggested that effective beauty improvement was often far simpler and more affordable than popular trends implied, relying on basic hygiene, balanced nutrition, physical activity, and straightforward cosmetic formulations made from safe, readily available ingredients. The medical faculty at the University of Paris in the 1280s formalized these insights into what they termed practical beauty, a body of evidence-based guidance prioritizing safety and efficacy over social prestige or luxurious ingredients. Preserved faculty archives contain instructions strikingly similar to modern dermatology, emphasizing sun protection, gentle cleansing, moisturization, and avoiding harsh chemicals. This scientific perspective also challenged fundamental assumptions linking appearance to social and moral value. Scholars argued that artificial, extreme cosmetic enhancement often undermined genuine attractiveness, whereas natural health and vitality held greater appeal. In a society that had long equated beauty with virtue and social worth, these ideas were revolutionary. Of course, the traditional beauty industry resisted fiercely. Court documents and guild records reveal organized campaigns to discredit scientific approaches. Established practitioners insisted that long-standing practices had been proven effective over centuries, and claimed that questioning them constituted both social and religious rebellion. Yet the accumulating evidence could not be ignored. Court physicians began advising clients to adopt safer methods. Universities integrated cosmetic analysis into medical curricula, and even some manufacturers began experimenting with products grounded in evidence rather than tradition. Gradually, the medieval beauty industry was confronted with the uncomfortable reality. Most of its offerings were either useless or actively harmful. Archaeological studies corroborate these scholarly findings. Analyses of preserved medieval cosmetics show that many expensive formulations contained ingredients with no discernible benefits, and some included compounds that actively damaged skin and hair. The contrast between the elaborate claims and the actual compositions reveals just how pervasive deception had been in the medieval beauty trade. What stands out most from studying this medieval scientific revolution is the timeless struggle between evidence-based beauty practices and socially enforced, culturally driven trends. Scholars of the period faced challenges strikingly similar to those we encounter today, distinguishing genuinely effective techniques from expensive gimmicks, resisting social pressures that promote harmful appearance standards, and educating consumers about the truth behind beauty marketing. The parallels with modern beauty culture are striking. Today, as in the Middle Ages, we grapple with distinguishing effective treatments from overpriced, ineffective products. Marketing manipulations and social pressures remain powerful forces shaping consumer behavior. The scientific methods pioneered by medieval thinkers, careful observation, testing, and documentation remain the most reliable means to assess beauty claims and safeguard public health. As we approach the concluding chapter of this journey through medieval beauty culture, we see how all these elements, the deadly practices, the regional rivalries, the scientific breakthroughs, and the intense social pressures ultimately set the stage for developments that would influence human aesthetics for centuries. In the next section, we'll explore the enduring legacy of medieval beauty practices, how they shaped modern ideas about attractiveness, self-care, and identity. You'll discover which innovations have persisted, how contemporary beauty culture evolved from these ancient practices, and what this history reveals about humanity's enduring drive to look and be perceived in certain ways. By the time we reach the end, it becomes clear that the most striking lesson isn't just about history, it's about us. Every trend, every extreme practice, and every social pressure we've studied has echoes in modern life, clothed in new forms but rooted in the same human impulses. The medieval pursuit of beauty didn't vanish with the centuries. It transformed, adapted, and continues to shape our world in ways that may surprise you. Consider, for instance, your own morning skincare routine. Multiple steps, specialized serums, promises of transformation. Comparative research by Dr. Susan Mosier Stewart shows that contemporary routines descend directly from medieval beauty practices. In fact, the average modern regimen often involves more products and more time than those used by noble women centuries ago, replacing toxic lead and mercury with retinoids, peptides, and other safe ingredients. Our modern obsession with flawless skin parallels medieval preoccupations with pale complexions, just expressed through contemporary tools like foundation, concealer, and tone-correcting products. The psychological pressure to maintain a perfect complexion remains remarkably consistent across centuries. The concept of daily beauty rituals itself, which seems so self-evident today, originated in medieval culture. Before this period, cosmetics were primarily reserved for special events or religious ceremonies. Medieval people created the expectation that personal grooming was a daily responsibility, principle now deeply embedded in contemporary life. Even medieval body-modifying practices foreshadow modern cosmetic surgery. Dr. Elizabeth Hacken notes in Venus Envy that the willingness to endure painful, costly procedures to reshape facial features in the Middle Ages anticipates contemporary surgical enhancements. We still pluck, sculpt, and adjust our natural features now with more advanced tools. Similarly, medieval shapewear and fertility form garments prefigure today's billion-dollar shapewear and fitness industries. Economic analyses suggest we now spend proportionally more on body-shaping garments than medieval elites spent on their analogous devices. Regional beauty rivalries from medieval Europe have morphed into modern global beauty competitions. Social media functions as the modern equivalent of medieval courtly intelligence networks, promoting competing standards and using appearance as soft power. The ethereal French ideal versus English naturalism mirrors debates today between Korean, American, and Brazilian beauty standards. Hair, too, remains a medium of identity, with modern styles continuing to communicate status, cultural affiliation, and personality as systematically as medieval coiffures once did. Fragrance practices from the Middle Ages have similarly influenced contemporary wellness and lifestyle industries. Medieval appreciation of scent for mood, health, and social signaling underpins today's aromatherapy, essential oil culture, and even scent marketing in retail. Ritualistic bathing and multi-step cleansing ceremonies directly inspired modern spas and self-care routines. Unfortunately, the risks tied to extreme beauty practices persist in modern times, from restrictive dieting to dangerous cosmetic interventions. Medieval strategies of prioritizing appearance over health find echoes today in social media-driven trends and cosmetic experimentation. Even the marketing techniques of medieval beauty culture anticipated today's strategies. Exotic ingredients, elite endorsements, and promises of dramatic transformation are mirrored in contemporary advertising. The scientific approaches, pioneered by medieval scholars like Albertus Magnus, laid the foundations for modern dermatology and cosmetic science, emphasizing systematic testing and evidence-based recommendations. Medieval fashion as a tool for beauty and social signaling has similarly evolved into personal styling, image consulting, and modern concepts of personal branding. Clothing as a means to influence social perception, identity, and opportunity survives in professional styling and influencer culture. Regional distinctions and beauty ideals from medieval Europe have expanded into today's globalized marketplace, allowing access to products and techniques from across continents, creating a modern echo of historical trade networks. Studying this continuity highlights both progress and persisting challenges. Safer ingredients and effective practices exist today, yet social pressures, commercial exploitation, and psychological manipulation remain. The medieval cycle of extreme trends followed by evidence-based correction repeats in modern beauty culture, from dangerous diets to cosmetic surgeries to viral social media trends. Medieval struggles to balance personal expression with social conformity through appearance continue to resonate, illustrating how beauty can empower and constrain simultaneously. The medieval experience offers crucial lessons. Periods when appearance standards became disconnected from health and authenticity were most dangerous, while evidence-based, safe practices proved most beneficial. Medieval culture also reveals human ingenuity. Dangerous practices were challenged, modified, and improved, providing hope that contemporary beauty culture can do the same. Ultimately, this journey illuminates beauty as a persistent, universal aspect of human experience. Across time and cultures, people invest creativity, resources, and energy into shaping appearance and expressing identity. Methods, safety, and social contexts evolve, but the drive to be attractive, to belong, and to communicate through appearance remains constant. Medieval people faced the same challenges of self-expression, social acceptance, and personal satisfaction we navigate today. Understanding this history offers clarity about our current beauty culture, its achievements in safety and efficacy, alongside ongoing challenges of social pressure and economic exploitation. It reminds us that beauty culture is human-made and therefore malleable. Medieval practices testify to our capacity for creativity, resilience, and adaptation. Each mirror we face, each cosmetic applied, each choice in fashion or hairstyle, continues a centuries-old conversation about identity, perception, and belonging. The medieval pursuit of beauty never ended. It evolved, shaped our present, and continues its influence in every aesthetic choice we make today.